All right, here we go. Okay, so we're back at Cracks in Postmodernity with Matthew Binder, the author of Pure Cosmos Club. Matthew, thank you for coming out.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Yeah.
So you reached out on Instagram, told me about your book, sent me a copy, and people do this from time to time. I get these review copies. Honestly, don't read all of them. And I was like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna give it a try. And after a couple pages in, I was sold because, as I was saying to you before, the sense of humor is like, it's so subtle and unassuming that like catches you off guard, and it's really captivating. It's I don't find many novels like this, so curious to know more about like what's behind the kind of humor you use, what inspired it, what are you trying to get at in here?
I mean, I guess when I sat down to write this novel, I didn't have like any sort of specific intention. I had gotten fired from my job on a Friday, and so on the next Monday, I was like, I have time on my hands before I get find a new job, so I should start writing a novel because I had another novel come out a few months before, and a couple days prior, I'd gone to a party at this like art dealer's house named Michael Bargo, and it's a very fancy like art dealer guy, and he had this little dog in a wheelchair, and so yeah, I didn't have any intent. I just sat down, and on the first page it was like a guy and his dog, and I knew it was going to be like set. I guess the guy was like an artist because I established that in the first paragraph of the book. But yeah, there wasn't like a plan for the humor. I guess you and I were talking offline, and you asked me sort of like who influenced this book, and I guess the book that sort of came to mind was Hunger by Knut Hamsun, and it sort of was like this radically subjective first-person narration with somebody whose sort of worldview and behaviors and thoughts are very, what might seem like irrational, but like has like its own like internal logic, like coherent logic, but it's just different than like everybody else's logic. And so I guess that was like sort of the guiding force.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I was telling you, people have recommended Hunger to me, partially because, I've done a lot with Nietzsche, and a friend of mine was like, yeah, if you like Nietzsche, you're going to get Hamsun's sense of humor, or not a sense of humor, but like the kind of nihilism, the absurdity, that like, I don't know, again, your brand of humor is absurd in a way, because again, it's like, it comes off as super sincere, super serious, and yet like you can't take it seriously because it's so outlandish, it's so out of this world. Like there are parts where you don't even know if it's reality, if it's a dream, if it's delusion. But as you're saying, like a lot of it revolves around this like high art world, which, as you said, like some people take it as satire, as trying to mock it, and like I can see that, but it doesn't come off as like you have this agenda to make fun of, the art scene or whatever kind of pretentious New York kind of groups. But I don't know, like what do you say when people say that it's a satire of whatever kind of like niche worlds? What do you make of that?
I mean, yeah, I get why people say that, but I wasn't deliberately like setting out to like use humor to like criticize anyone specifically. I was just trying to show people in this world how they are, and like they are sometimes like absurd and behave very badly, and it's hilarious, like people with this much money and like status, but like I tried to treat like all the characters with like tenderness, and you're getting it's all told from the perspective of this sort of character with a very skewed worldview. So he doesn't he doesn't treat them with any derision at all. Like he lets the book, like some of the characters act badly, but like as the author, I'm not trying to like impose myself in the book and be like these are bad people, because like I fucking loved all these characters, and like I like all these people, and I know people like this in real life, and yeah, they behave badly, but like fucking I enjoy them.
Yeah, and it's like what's refreshing is that right now I feel like we're in this moment where there's this back and forth tension between being overly sincere, being cringe, and then being totally irony filled, to the point that like it's straight up nihilistic, and kind of, I don't know, a lot of these people become super self-indulgent, and like again, there's this there's this sincerity while still being somewhat ironically detached, still having the ability to laugh at it all and not take it too seriously. And that's the virtue of the main character. Like, he's the nicest guy. He's trying his hardest to do what matters to him, to live a meaningful life, and yet he's like kind of completely ridiculous, which enables you to laugh while also appreciating him as a person, like to see his humanity. And the other thing though with like this whole art scene, I feel like this really gets into like the psyche of the artist, like the I don't know, the fact that most artists tend to have these outlandish imaginations, have these like, I don't know, sense of being detached from the real world, which again can be a virtue, can be something that enables you to be creative and come up with outside of the box kind of ideas, but also can get you into trouble, can get you into these crazy situations. So I don't know, like what's going on there in terms of like trying to get into the mind of an artist? Like what were you trying to do, or like, I don't know, what interests you at least within like an artist's mind, I guess?
Yeah. Like I said, like I didn't like sit down with any objective to like portray an artist in like any particular way. As I was writing an artist, maybe like I think in the very first paragraph of the book, like I describe like a piece of art that he makes. He says that his girlfriend has left him, and he had stolen a manhole cover and painted it to look like Io, a moon of Jupiter, and had delivered it to her birthday party, like basically crashed her birthday party to give it to her, and then things got out of hand and he ended up getting arrested. So that's like in the first paragraph. And then quickly I like talked about this like series of paintings he made of like Gwyneth Paltrow, where she becomes like increasingly menacing, and like eventually she's like sprouts bat wings and like horns, and like is holding all of mankind like in the palm of her, like in like a I don't know, like a jar of like anti-aging cream or something. Yeah, I don't know. The things just sort of came to me as I was writing. I didn't like have like a list of things that of pieces that Paul was going to make. He probably makes like 15 pieces of art in the thing, and and they're described at some length. But one of the things I guess I'm proud of is like the reader never knows whether like Paul's a genius artist or a terrible artist, and it really just depends on like who's viewing the art. Like some people find his work genius, and like other people find it quite awful, and like his sort of like, I wouldn't call him his friend, whatever, Danny, this like his fellow artist, like really does not like his work at all, because he like uses like supernatural elements in his work, and he finds it whatever. So yeah.
Yeah, and this is like on the note of sincerity. This is what I feel makes Paul, the main character, most relatable, is that like he's a guy who's, I don't know, he's a magical thinker. Again, like he's not super grounded in reality, and that can help him to be creative with his art, but gets him into a lot of issues, especially with the women he's interested in. I don't know, and it's just like it's profoundly relatable, especially for people who are artistically inclined, or for writers at least. Like, I don't know, you see he's a guy who's trying to make sense of the world as it is, even though he doesn't always fit in, doesn't always get what other, like, I don't know, he doesn't get with the program the same way most normal people do, but I don't know, he's trying to be a good guy. And one of the relationships we're talking about is with his cousin, who he has this kind of imagined rivalry with. There are certain incidents that he swears happened that quite possibly may not have happened. And his cousin seems to really care about him. So I don't know, like, what are you doing there with this, the tension between him and his cousin? Like, what do you, I don't know, what's going on there?
I think this is a case of like my subconscious working. I literally didn't realize it the whole time I was writing it, but I knew the main character's name was Paul, and my middle name is Paul. I guess I knew that, but it wasn't deliberate. I was actually thinking of someone else named Paul, but when I first sat down to write it on day one, in the first paragraph I needed a name, I just put Paul down. And then the cousin who he has this rivalry with, who he sees as his nemesis, is named Lewis, and that happens to be my brother's middle name, Lewis. And this character is nothing like my brother, but I guess subconsciously maybe I was working some stuff out with my brother on the page, and I didn't clock that until I think my mother told me that when she read it. And I guess one of the things I was playing with there is like he's surrounded by all these people, and he doesn't see them for who they are. And his cousin, who loves him more than anyone and treats him very kindly, you know, he always felt inferior to his cousin as a child, so he's held on to that like resentment, and he's like projecting all these like really like benevolent actions that his cousin does towards him as like very malicious, and he thinks that his cousin's like this like really cunning like sort of evil person out to get him, when it's really quite the opposite, I think.
Yeah, no, I definitely see how, like, again, the people with a creative mind can fall into that kind of paranoia, you know. And again, this magical thinking of like, okay, he has this vendetta against me, when in reality, no, he's just a normie who's, you know, really loving, and he just doesn't get it, you know. No, but the standout character, Blanche, if you didn't mention that Blanche was a dog, most people would never figure that out, which is like, as I was saying before, like it's weird because most time we see animals in literature, they're either just straight up animals or they're, you know, like fill-ins for romantic partners or for children. But like Blanche is straight up personified. Like there are times when Paul mentions that Blanche gives him advice. I think she like resuscitates him when he's passed out or something.
Or at least he thinks she did.
Yeah. So yeah, like what's going on with Blanche? What's the story there?
Yeah, I mean, Blanche, for I guess most of you haven't read this, she's like a little dog in a wheelchair that I guess on the first page of the book, he tells the story of like riding his bicycle through a dark alley and hitting this little dog. And then the vet says that they should put her down because her legs are irrevocably broken. And instead he makes this little wheelchair for her, and then they become fast friends. But yeah, so, you know, to Paul, she's a partner, a best friend, a confidant, a wise sage. But to everyone else in the book, she's just a dog. And she doesn't speak in the book. It's all Paul's projections of like what she's saying. And so like constantly you're getting things because you're getting it out of Paul's mouth where it seems like she's a person. But, you know, as a reader, you're going, you know, like a smart reader's going, oh, that's, you know, Paul's projection. You know, my mom read the book. I told my mom I was writing a commercially viable book. And so she read it in manuscript form. And she read the first 50 pages, and then she came to me with like tears in her eyes and said, Matt, who do you think would ever want to read this book? Because she like doesn't get absurdity, you know? And so she's very literal. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I kind of get back to your other previous questions. Like, it's very like Don Quixote-esque, you know. Like, I guess maybe that would be like the closest like.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I can definitely see the Quixote kind of reference. No, but side note, what is that like sharing your work with your mom? Because like, I don't know, I'm not in a place where I want to share my writing or whatever I'm doing with my parents. Because like, first it's like, I don't know, I just feel like it's weird, but also I know they wouldn't get it.
Yeah. My mom definitely, so my mom read it, or she read like the first 100 pages, really didn't like it. And then she got sick, and so she only had like 3 months to live. And so she was like, I'm going to read it again. And this is like still, she passed away like 5 months before the book came out. So like in her last month of life, she like reread it. And I think the main thing she was upset by the first time is like, she thinks I'm Paul.
Okay.
And because obviously I'm borrowing, like every writer does, they like borrow little tidbits from their life. But I'm like reassured her that I'm not Paul, and that she needs to like try and like read it a little bit more objectively. And then she appreciated it. But also, like, I knew what the book was. I knew what I had accomplished with it, and like, and my mom or my father, my dad likes my work actually, but their opinion doesn't like sway me that much. Actually, nobody's. There's like. Once I have established what I've done and I know whether I'm happy with it, I'm not so concerned of like how it's received. Like, I did not expect this book to be well received at all, and the response has actually been like very surprising that people are getting it. Like, I did not think people would get it, and all the agents did not think people would get it. They're like, I got a lot of, I love this. It's not commercially viable. People are not going to get it. Like, they're not going to get the humor. They're not going to get the absurdity. Like, I would love to read it when it gets published. Please send it to me when it's published, if it gets published, but I'm not taking a chance on it.
So this was published. This is Stalking Horse. Is that the press? So how did that go down with them? How did you end up getting them to take it?
So Stalking Horse had published a writer named Dee Foy, whose work I've been reading for a bunch of years, and so Stalking Horse was on my radar, and then the publisher there is a guy named James Reich, and he lives in Santa Fe. He's British, but he lives in Santa Fe now, and I'm from New Mexico. So at one point, long before I'd written this, I went to visit him, or I was home, and I called him up or emailed him, said, "Hey, I'm a fan of the Dee Foy books that you published. Can I come hang with you?" So then we started drinking and hanging, and so once a year I'd come to New Mexico to visit family, and I would have drinks with him. And he publishes a lot of speculative fiction and sort of highbrow books that are too big and too long and too dense and too challenging for mainstream publishing. Not that that's what this is at all, but I know he takes a chance on different writers who are doing sort of a little bit more experimental work. So whatever, I sent him the book, and then I think I sent it out to a couple indie presses, and I got 2 offers the same week, and one of them was his and one was from another press. And the other press was bigger, but I like the work that comes out of this press better, and I have a good relationship with James. So so that's how it ended up coming out on Stalking Horse.
So back to Paul. At a certain point, he gets warped into a cult. And a lot of what goes down is a lot of things that you hear about people who get trapped in cults. There's a certain point, I think towards the end though, where he's doing some really crazy shit, some dangerous stuff. And he basically implies that he feels bad people whose eyes are blinded to reality. And you're made to question, okay, but who is really blinded? Whose eyes are really covered? Is it Paul or is it the rest of the world? I'm curious, why did the book take this turn? Why the cult piece?
So I guess the cult piece, well, to your point, the chapter where he says some people are just blind. He had gone to see someone who had left the cult essentially, and the guy is, in reality has seen the light and see what what sort of dark forces he was entangled with. And Paul says basically, this poor guy, he's lost it. And then the last sentence of that paragraph is basically he says something like, this guy is blind, and then Paul goes home and does a blood sacrifice on himself or something, something super absurd, at this shrine, this altar. So clearly, clearly it's Paul who doesn't see. But my girlfriend at the time was dating, or my girlfriend at this time when I was writing this was best friends with this woman whose boyfriend was like a guru of sorts who was becoming very successful. This was right before COVID started, and he's leading these mass meditations, and they were becoming huge. It was becoming a big business. He was leading mass meditations Madison Square Garden, and Oprah had brought him on tour leading mass meditations. And not that he's a charlatan, but he's certainly not an enlightened person. He's an entrepreneur who saw an angle, but I saw the way, because he was very charismatic and charming and handsome, and could portray this confidence. People just ate it up and fell under his influence very quickly. And so I was spending a bunch of time with this guy, and I was just this is great. I was never charmed by him in that way. I was friendly with him, but I was just interested in that dynamic. So so I wrote him into the book, and quickly I knew that I wanted to take a more occult angle. His shit's pretty harmless. He's leading mass meditation. So I started reading a bunch of books on Heaven's Gate and Jonestown, and so I incorporated some of those sort of doomsday themes into the book.
So that's what I was going to ask though, because on the podcast we cover a lot of religious, spiritual kind of content, and I was trying to figure out okay, what are the actual tenets of this cult? It's never super clearly defined, because you see borrow some concepts from Christianity, you see some Eastern Hindu kind of things, and you see like the cult of personality like Jonestown. So yeah, like was there any intentionality behind the like actual beliefs of this cult? Like as you were doing research, were you trying to like, I don't know, comment on any particular spiritual kind of motifs or ideas?
I mean, I guess I was sort of exploring the idea. Like I've always wanted to feel the religious or like spiritual impulse, and I'm like so jealous of people who have felt that, and I never have. Like, and I'm super jealous of that. So I was sort of exploring. I wasn't necessarily like super interested in developing like a super coherent ideology behind the cult. He's just borrowing things that are pragmatic for him to advance his ends, which are, but he wanted money. But through Paul, I was sort of like exploring what it would be like to like give yourself over to something and to like have faith. And, at one point someone says something in the book about like the tenets of this cult, stand in tension with every like thing I understand about the world, and like it doesn't make sense. And he said, well, like the less it makes sense, the more faith you have to have, which makes it better, And
Yeah, and like on a personal level, I can relate to that because I don't know. I feel like people who are artistically inclined, magical thinkers, tend to be more aware of this desire for some kind of religious or spiritual experience. And if you don't grow up with that or you never have that, I see why it's very easy to get drawn to such like cult-like figures who are dynamic and who are charismatic. And there are some points where like it made me look back at my own kind of journey, and I see how there are moments where I got kind of caught up in like cult of personality, wanting to worship people who seem like they have the answers, who seem like they have that thing that you're looking for, that you're missing. And again, for me, like there came a point where I realized if I'm genuinely seeking some kind of spiritual reality, if I'm seeking God, then I don't know, worshiping a person or like blindly going head on into something, that's not it. Like that's not going to get you there. So yeah, like I don't know, like again, on this note of sincerity, you see how this is someone who's really searching and who got caught up in something that is kind of false, and yet he recognizes that there is something true there. So I don't know, like, yeah, you just said that you've met people like this who you weren't necessarily drawn to, but I don't know, like, what do you see in people who get sucked into those types of cults, like the Jonestown, cult of personality, these big figures? Yeah, like, what do you make of that?
Well, one of the things that I wanted to like establish in the book is that there are a few miracles that occur in the book, or at least miracles in Paul's eyes, that sort of make it make sense that he would sort of fall under the influence of this guy, because he does deliver, at least in Paul's eyes, like a few miracles that are not really ever fully explained in the book. So I don't explain away the sort of the magic that happens, because you're only getting it from Paul. And of course, like maybe it's like apocryphal coming from Paul, but like you only get it from Paul, his view of things. And so, yeah, if you really see things the way that Paul saw them and these miracles occurred, then sure, like me as Matt, the person, if some of these things had occurred to me, or like had happened to me, yeah, then I think I could believe. And so yeah, that was that. What was your question? I'm a couple of drinks
like
deep
people
now.
who get sucked into these kinds of cults, where like there's a dynamic leader.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the things I was struggling with is like I had just moved to New York when I like wrote this book, and I'm from New Mexico, and so I have never been around like big money and status the way that you're exposed to in New York City. Like I was writing about, in part about my experience in New York City of just sort of being awed by all these people that came into my orbit. But in this world, the highest values are status and money, and geez, that's like a really sad condition of the world, and especially in like a place like New York City, where anything that like smacks of like religion or tradition is sort of considered like retrograde or like antithetical to progress. And yeah, back to my point, it's like, where's all this progress led us? Like a worship of status and money. And so I not deliberately, but like I guess I was commenting on that subconsciously in the book.
And this just came to mind. The fact that he's named Paul. Now I'm starting to see, like, kind of reminds me of Paul, like, from the Bible, like St. Paul. Because Paul's this crazy guy. Like, he's, 1 minute he's a Jew killing Christians, then he's knocked off a horse, and he's like, oh, now I'm a Christian and I want to convert everyone. And you see it, like, if you read the letters of Paul, like, he's kind of this schizo, like, magical thinker who's super, like, going back and forth between extremes. But deep down is a sincere person who wants to seek what's true. He wants to seek God. Is there any connection there, or was that just like me randomly? I don't know.
I'm not like well versed on Paul, the biblical figure, but what you were saying, like, yeah, my Paul, like his fundamental trait is sort of that he has like a divided mind, and like he doesn't have like a governing. There's not like an ideology that like sort of drives him, so he is susceptible to these like different influences, and it can take him in like different directions, and sort of like almost like what's pragmatic for him at that time, where like, you know, some of, you know, at some point in the book, like he's very skeptical of the cult, right? He's very skeptical of James, like the guru, but then he loses Blanche, spoiler alert, and he sort of hits this like rock bottom, and he is seeking something, and like this guy James like provides like some answers and like delivers some material good to him, or spiritual good to him, and you know, he does have this divided mind, so it allows him to like sort of go in that direction, maybe like Paul, the biblical figure Paul.
Yeah, no, there's definitely something there. Just side note, if you hear background noise, because we're in Bushwick, sitting outside, what is this place called? Newtown. Fine vegetarian food. Shout out to them. Anyway, so, okay. No, I want to go back to what you were saying about moving from New Mexico to New York. Yeah, like, what was that like for you? How did that shape you as a writer? I don't know.
So I didn't start writing at all until I turned 30. I never had any ambitions to write. I sort of bouncing back and forth between San Diego and Albuquerque, where I'm from, and like one day I was like, it was like Thanksgiving had just ended, and I was driving back to San Diego with my friend Skip, and Skip was very sick, and he like required absolute silence in the car, and I didn't have headphones with me or something. So I spent 13 hours driving by myself with him sleeping in dead silence, and I plotted out a novel, and then the next day I quit my job and decided to write the novel. Spent a year on it, never got published, it was horrible. And then I wrote another novel, didn't get published. And I was totally outside of like the literary world. I knew no one that wrote. San Diego, maybe there's some writers there, but mainly people are just doing triathlons. In Albuquerque, maybe there's some writers, but none of my friends. And then I was back at Albuquerque, and I watched an episode of Parts Unknown about Budapest. This is a couple years later. And then the next day I quit my job and moved to Budapest and wrote a novel. And that's when, after that, I moved to New York City. Yeah, moving to New York in your like 30s, like most people move to New York in their 20s because they're like super ambitious, and I was not like an ambitious person. So I basically lost my psychic bearings when I got here, because I was just surrounded by, you know, hyper smart, hyper ambitious people. And I didn't know how to like process all that, because I was not necessarily that. And so I guess I put it into a novel. I wrote about this world that, sort of a very grandiose version of it, of New York City. But yeah, obviously my time in New York, because it's very much a New York novel. Yeah.
And now that you've been in New York for a while, like, I don't know, what are some of your observations about the literary scene? I don't know, how things changed since you first got here?
Well, when I first got here, I didn't know anyone in the literary scene, and I got my book published by a small press, and it got some attention. It was sort of a dystopian future novel. Usually, like with a dystopia future novel, it's like the hyper-oppressed victim overcoming like all obstacles and human triumph and moral uplift. But my book was told from the perspective of a member of the elite class who was just trying to who's very not very corrupt, but like, you know, when the revolution comes, he's just trying to save his own head, right? So it sort of takes the trope and like turns it on its head. And the literary world was very divided over it. It was very polarized. Like a lot of people were like, "Oh, American Welbeck," but like a lot of other folks were not so pleased with it. And so whatever. Like I wasn't like I've never been part of like the big press world. I just my books come out on small presses, and I get a much better reception there. And I thought this book would come out on a big press, and I was kind of surprised that it didn't. And But the reception's been great to this one, much better than my last book. And maybe that's my problem. maybe that's like I didn't do it right, or something. But I like this book. I'm happy with what I did.
Yeah, I mean the fact that you're like not in the big lit world, like I don't know. There's just something very down to earth about the book that like I don't know if you're with a bigger press, maybe you wouldn't have had the freedom, But no, since you bring up Welbeck, there's a particular scene in the book which had me dying laughing. So Paul is at this, it's a fashion show, pretty much.
Yeah, he's in Paris to go to basically to sabotage his friend who's the son of a billionaire hedge fund manager. And so the rich kid is in art and fashion, and he's doing a collaboration with a luxury French fashion brand making cat bags out of like dead cats. And the cult leader wants him. Paul's mission is to like bring the rich kid into the fold, because ultimately like the cult leader wants access to this rich guy. And so Paul is sent to Danny's fashion show in Paris to sort of sabotage the show. And
And the part that's hilarious is that there were supposed to be kids at this show throwing flowers, right?
He's supposed to bring these like Syrian refugee kids from the Banlieue, like in Paris, to throw flowers at the models. And I don't want to give too much away, but he does not do that, and it ends up bringing some like fundamentalist Muslims to the fashion show instead.
Yeah, which is like in a way a Welbeckian turn of events, but what was so hilarious is like, okay, I mean, obviously you're wading into kind of dangerous territory, like, you're hitting on some topics that are some would deem sensitive, and that, like someone like Welbeck gets in a lot of trouble for, but like the fact that it's such an absurdly funny scene, like, you pull it off in a way that's tasteful, and that's, again, like it's hilarious. But yeah, like the fact that, I don't know, like we were mentioning some of the other authors that I've had on the podcast who, like some of whom, they do get in trouble for touching on issues that are very sensitive. But you've managed to get away with this like pretty much unharmed. So it's
threading the needle on this book. Yeah.
So I don't know, like was that on your mind at all? Like if people being overly sensitive to some of the scenes or some of the the topics that you're touching on?
Yes. Because in my previous novel, The Absolved, like I did get a lot of grief from some people, and so I mean, one of the things I wanted to do was like write a character that was super odd and like has like it's told from like a radically subjective like worldview, but I wanted him to be like super lovable and like kind of naive in a way, like he's sort of childlike and which allowed, because of he's like sort of very childlike, it allowed him to like have sort of these like like whatever, maybe like some problematic beliefs, because he comes to them like from a very naive perspective, like he's not malicious at all, and it's certainly not like he has no ill will towards anyone except for his cousin, who's like the sweetest person.
Yeah, and so like you managed to poke fun at certain tropes, but like it's very clear that you don't have an agenda when you're writing this. And I don't know, like it makes me think about the role that male writers have in the literary game right now. Because like, I mean, I think it's safe to say it's safer to have women writers. You're less likely to get in trouble if you're a woman. But like, I don't know, do you feel like as a guy writing, has it been difficult? Also, what does it mean to you to to get your voice out there as a guy in a literary scene that is changing?
Yeah. Well, back to the Welbeck, I was thinking about like Annika Levy, who's like the editor of Forever. She blurbed the book, and her blurb was just, "It's like Welbeck, but good-natured." And I don't know. I mean, the whole guy, like in my day job, like it's very quantitative, And so like with all these like debates about like whatever, who's getting published, who's not getting published, like I think a lot of it, like the conversation is not in like good faith at all. Like I remember like last year, like Joyce Carol Oates like tweeted something about like some male writer not being able to get published, and then there was like a lot of backlash and blah blah blah. And so I just came about it from like a quantitative perspective. I went to one of the big houses and looked at their website and looked at the last 100 debut novels that they published, and 80% of them were females. And so, and then you look at like I did something similar. I took like the top like 5 or like whatever 5 like big like agencies that I knew and counted the agents up and just made a thing, and it was 80% female. And so, but also I read. I think I've seen statistics where like 85 or like 80% of like the fiction bought these days is bought by females. So like it's like a chicken or an egg thing. It's like, well, the market is female readers, so you want to give them books that female readers are gonna want to read. So it's sort of a chicken or an egg thing where it's like, oh, well, what happened first? Men stopped reading fiction, or women started dominating the publishing scene and only put out books that like would appeal to women. And like I get it, like it's a business, so the way to make money in publishing fiction at least is like selling books that will appeal to like Oprah or Reese Witherspoon's book club and whatever. I mean, I guess like good books will find their way, whether it's a male or a female writing it. I stopped worrying about it. Like I kind of stopped caring about like what the big houses are publishing, and most of the stuff that I like is coming out on smaller presses anyway. And I think at those presses, maybe some of them have like a political agenda, but I don't know. There's a lot of good work that's still getting published, so whatever. Maybe it's an overcorrection. Maybe that's good. I don't know. It's not really here or there for me. As long as my book gets published somewhere, it'll find like its audience somewhere. And so, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, before you try to cancel this podcast, of course, we love women writers. No problem with them at all. Yeah. No, they're some great women writers. No, but for me personally, like, there was a point where I started to realize, like, I was reading a lot of novels by guys, and I saw how it was kind of filling this void for me that, like, I don't know, because on one hand you see, like, yeah, a lot of this pro-feminism kind of rhetoric out there, and then you see the reactionary manosphere kind of stuff, neither of which are particularly helpful for me. I mean, both have their noble goals, but I found reading fiction by guys was really helpful to, like, grapple with certain questions about, yeah, what does it mean to be a guy in this society? Like, what is my place here? What are my gifts? What are some of my weaknesses? So, like, I don't know, for me it's definitely significant that guys are getting their voices out there, not just for the sake of their own success, but to, like, I don't know, to say significant things that could potentially speak to certain questions that guys are facing. And, like, and the fact that, to the credit of feminism, like, I don't know, the main modes that men have to express themselves, like, whether it's through sports, athletics, whatever, like, are valuable, of course, but having guys in the arts, having guys in literature, like, you're able to say certain things about your experience as a male that, yeah, maybe the more traditional avenues you may not be able to express or communicate. So, like, I don't know, I definitely think it is a significant thing. But no, then on that note, I wanna get into, like, your process of writing. Like, I don't know, what do you do to get into it? What does your process look like?
Yeah, I think you and I sort of touched on this offline a little bit, but like I have like a pretty like professional day job, which sort of like zaps my like creative impulse, my creative energies. Like I'm talking to like lawyers and private equity people all day and like dealing with money stuff, and so I can't really serve two masters at the same time in that sense. So basically, what I do is I work for a couple years, save up money as best I can, and then I quit. And then I spend a year working on a novel like it's a day job. And so I've done that like 3 or 4 times now. And for me, like, I think working in this like sort of condensed, like I talk to a lot of people, it takes up like 4 years to write a novel, and I'm like, man, like, you're not even the same person when you're finishing the novel as you were when you started the novel. And for me, it's better to just sort of capture a time and a moment And I think sort of writing quickly sort of gives the work some of that momentum that I think my book, for maybe some, whatever its faults are, like it has a lot of momentum. Like a lot of people tell me they like read the book in 2 days or a day or whatever. So like this book, I got fired like right when like basically like from my last job, like right before COVID. And so I like took off and went to like rural Colorado and worked on the book for a year. And when I ran out of money, like I went and got a job. And that's that's my process.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty ballsy way to do it, to work for a couple of years and then to quit and just dive totally into writing. But I get it though, like having that like serving two masters, it's rough because I don't know. I mean, people who aren't writers may not realize how much energy it takes to really go all the way into it, because it's not just, I don't know, you can't just say, okay, I'm going to set aside 2 hours and I'm going to write. Like, because it might take the whole day to even get a paragraph out, you know. But no, and like one of the things that like some of the writers who have come on the podcast have said is like, at a certain point it becomes a quasi like spiritual experience, because I don't know, like, you're really, like you said, it saps you of your energy. You're really like pouring yourself out to really like give yourself to your readers, you know. So like, I don't know, would you say in some way there's like a spiritual dimension to the way you go about writing?
Yeah, like to that point, when I am writing the novel, like that's all I'm doing, really. Like if I was working at my day job, like, yeah, to like sort of allocate 2 hours in the morning or in the evening to like write, like that wouldn't work for me, because when I'm writing the novel, I'm literally living in that novel more than I am living in like the material world. Like that's all I'm thinking about. You know, I might be at the desk actually like actually typing 3 or 4 hours a day, but I'm thinking about the novel all day. Like my brain's just like working. And what was the other part of your question?
Yeah, is there like a spiritual power?
Oh, yeah. So, like, as you can tell from like hearing me speak, like I'm not super articulate and speaking, but like for whatever reason, when I'm like, there's something about the act of like actually like typing, and it just comes out totally differently. And like I don't have like when I like read over my work, I'm like, this is much better than what I'm capable of. So I do feel like that there's some sort of like alchemy or like divine intervention that like. Because it is like my work is certainly beyond like the narrow like limits of like my abilities that I have in like my day-to-day life, like I'm considering like quitting my job now and starting a new novel in the new year, and I'm just being like, well, fuck, I can't. Is the magic gonna come again? Because like right now I'm just an inarticulate person like wandering the earth. Will the magic come again? Because like I don't feel it, you know. And like every time I sit down to write every morning, I'm like a little bit terrified that like this is the day where it's not going to come. And I keep like a very strict schedule. Like I sit down at the desk at like 9 a.m. and I'm not even like really like a heavy drinker or anything like that, but like I need 2 drinks in the morning before I start, just to sort of take the edge off, because otherwise I'll be a little bit too obsessive and like hung up on like every word and like, is this good? Is this not good? And I won't get anywhere. And I hold myself to like, when I'm working, like 1,000 words a day, 5 days a week, and I take weekends off like a normal job. But yeah, literally every morning I sit down and I'm like, this is it. This is the time where it's not going to come. And then at the end of the day, I feel better than I've ever, it's the only thing that really gives my life meaning. And it's time I feel like I'm doing like serious work, like my day job, whatever, it pays me well, but like I don't find it fulfilling, like literally at all. Like, and I'm developing like solar projects, which I guess has like some material benefit to the world, and so people are like, you make a living and you're doing something great. I'm like, I guess, I don't know, like I just want to quit so I can write a book.
Yeah, no, I mean, I get it, because for a while I was teaching full time while trying to write, and like teaching's a whole other thing, because like that really requires you to just like pour all of yourself out, because like you have a bunch of kids in front of you who like,
how old were the kids you were teaching?
They were juniors and seniors in high school, so like, yeah, like they really needed you to give everything in the moment. So like by the time the school day's over, it's rough, it's hard to get any words out. But no, like the whole thing of like, do I know if today I'm going to be able to get anything done, this fear that maybe like nothing will come to me, that for me is where like I feel the spiritual dimension, because you're aware of your limitations, you're aware that, yeah, like maybe you have this gift to be creative with words, but you can't decide in this moment I'm going to churn out a chapter. Like it may come, it may not. So there's this sense of like dependence on something other than you, this like I don't know. I feel it to be like I've tried to move away from this fear, this intimidation that I'm not going to get it done. To like I want to kind of collaborate. I want to have this dynamic with this like entity greater than myself, so that I don't know that when ideas start to come, I can really I can dialogue with it. I can be, I can get something moving. But no, like, since you mentioned you have to have 2 drinks in the morning. I was having a conversation with another novelist, Andrew Barriga, who's his debut novel is coming out, I think in March next year, and he's going to come on the pod to talk about it. But he had a Substack post 2 days ago where he was talking about how how he tries to manage between writing, working out, and also being a dad, taking care of his kids. And one of the things he was saying is he tries to be very strict about setting a time for working out in the morning, really trying to stick to that routine, having his chunk of time to write, and then the time when he's with his kids. And I was saying to him, I don't know, I'm not disciplined enough of a person to have an actual workout routine. So I don't know, I try to, because especially if you're writing, you're very much in your head. So you need to do something that's going to ground you in your body. But if I'm going to actually be serious about exercise and setting fitness goals, that's going to sap me of so much energy. In addition to the time it takes to actually go and do it. So I know that while I'm writing, I can't be serious about that. And then with eating, the other thing I was saying, I developed this very unhealthy routine the last couple of weeks where I won't eat anything in the morning. I'll have tea, I'll have a cigarette. And that really gets me going to write, because I don't know, in a weird way, the hunger, I need to distract myself from the hunger. So if I'm all in on the writing, I'm not thinking about food. Whereas if I wake up and I don't know, my weakness is that when I wake up, I think about sugar. I need to eat carbs, I need to eat something sweet. And if I indulge in it, that just drains me of my energy. I'm groggy. I don't want to write anything. So I don't know, do you have in addition to having the 2 drinks, do you have an eating thing? Do you have a workout thing that you try to integrate with writing?
Yeah. When I wrote Pure Cosmos Club, I moved to rural Colorado, this place called I was living 30 minutes outside of Granby, Colorado, which is this small town, maybe 2,000 people, and it was during COVID. And so it's a sleepy town with 1 gas station, a grocery store, and a McDonald's. But I was living 30 minutes outside of that, and it's right on the edge of Rocky Mountain National Park. And so I was the healthiest I've ever been. All I did was work all morning. And then I was running 30 miles a week probably. Most days I would do a 5-mile run or 6-mile run, some days longer. And it's a high elevation, 9,000 feet where I was living. Had a pull-up bar. Was doing so basically all I did was exercise and write. I was living like a monk, and I think maybe that helped my lifestyle contributed to the work I was doing. I wasn't having I had no sex the entire time I lived there. I was living with my ex-girlfriend, but we were basically brother and sister at that time, and we were living as brother and sister. So I didn't have sex for a year and a half while I was writing the book, and maybe that's reflected in the book. He has sex once or twice, and it's foisted on him, and it's not an enjoyable sex necessarily for him. He's shell shocked, and yeah. So I think if I write another novel, I will clean up my act a lot and get on an exercise routine. And only drinking I do is the 2 drinks I do in the morning. But the book before that I was living in Budapest, and I was living like a lunatic. So, and that book came out pretty good too. So maybe there's no rhyme or reason.
Yeah, I mean that's another writing thing that I hear. Some people do the vow of celibacy. They do the nofap for the the entire time. I don't know.
It wasn't deliberate that I had no sex.
Yeah, okay.
It was just none available to me.
Yeah. No, but yeah, it's interesting how everybody's writing process is different. But at a certain point, there is a need for routine. There is a need, at least set aside that chunk of time so at least you'll get something done. Yeah, but other than that.
Yeah,
go ahead. No, so are there any other any things you want to shout out? Any plugs before we start to wrap things up?
Let's see, plugs in the sense of promoting other people's books or something.
Whatever.
Well, what do I like? A book by a guy named Parker Young. His book's called Cheap Therapist Says You're Insane. I really love that book. It came out this year. One of my entries that sort of do the New York literary world was John Lindsay. I like read his book Body High and I really really loved that book. And I don't read like a whole lot of like contemporary fiction, and so I don't really know like what's going on. But I really like Parker Young's book. I really like John Lindsay's book. I read Aesthetica, John's wife's book, Ali Roboto, so that's great. I have a little recording project called Bang Bang Jetaway. You can check that out, and get a Substack, Cracks in Postmodernity. I heard that's pretty good. I mean, the way we hooked up was I heard, either heard your podcast or was reading some of your articles, your pieces that you'd written. Yeah.
And of course, people should pick up Pure Cosmos Club. Pick up a copy. You won't regret it. And where can people follow you on the socials?
I haven't posted anything on Twitter in like years, so yeah. So I'm not on there. I'm on Instagram, but I mainly just post like press about the book and like some stories about I don't know, mostly my shit about the book. I don't put too much like personal stuff out on the internet. Yeah, just buy the book. The best. I mean, if you want the best of me, it's in the book. Like nothing I'm gonna give you outside of the book is worth that much. So, yeah, the most distilled, best version of me is in the book.
So pick up a copy of Pure Cosmos Club. And Matthew, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.